Okay, fantastic. Yes. Okay. I think that should be recording. I'm not too sure. I never use oh, but I don't want to see my transcript. Hi everyone. Welcome to our talk about how to become an educational psychologist, where we kind of want to track a little bit the path from after graduation to the doctorate and beyond. We have basically very different stages today here, like people on very different stages on that process. I'm super excited. I just said it to Laraib in the beginning, to have 3 former city students who, I think at least 2, Lucy, I have to admit, I can't quite remember that. I don't know if I taught you, but I vividly remember teaching Laraib and Dahaba and teaching here at City University. And I think it's always wonderful to see our former students and hear from them. I will not talk too much about the 3 of you. Emilia is a educational psychologist, and she at some point will hopefully introduce herself and talk a little bit about her background as well. So during the talk today, we will get to know each other better, and hopefully we will kind of answer all the questions that are related to how to become an educational psychologist and this kind of critical and slightly undefined and weird, uncertain phase between graduating and getting on a doctorate, where it's like, okay, what happens thereafter? And yes, maybe Laraib, Lucy, and Dahaba, and Emilia, if you could just shortly let us know what you're currently doing, and then we're trying to trace back or like start from your graduation then and see what happened thereafter. But maybe just to give everyone who's listening or viewing this just a bit of a feeling for who you are and what you're currently doing. I would just start with Lara because you're on my screen, the first person, and then Lucy, then Dahaba, and then Emilia, if that works for you guys. Okay.
So hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really well. I think that's a really good idea, and just because I feel like I'm at the earlier stages compared to Dahaba and Lucy. So I actually graduated this year in July, and I actually recognized some familiar names. I think some students who took a placement year, and then we went through first year and second year together. But anyway, so I started applying around May time to jobs associated with assistant psychologists. So currently I'm working as an assistant educational psychologist. So I remember around May time I started applying because I thought if I start applying early, then it's better because I'll have more time. And I also remember that there was like a really big emphasis on if you can get a job as an assistant psychologist, then like it makes the progress easier. I don't know if that's entirely true. I don't know what you guys think, but I feel like you can do other things. So I don't want you to take this as you have to be an assistant psychologist, but that's what I did. So I remember applying. It felt very daunting because some companies have really, really long application processes. And I remember the company that I'm working at now, when I was doing the application, it was like 10 questions and it was like essay like answers to those questions, and it was very extensive. And I remember I wrote more for my application than I did for my dissertation, which is not something that I recommend. But I think I was just very passionate and I just really wanted to get the job. So I put a lot of time and effort into it. And it went really well. I did end up getting the job. But I guess I could talk through some tips in applying if you are planning.
Yeah, maybe give us a moment on that. And then, yes, I think we should talk about that. Just to provide a little bit of context, I think most of you, hopefully, who are viewing this or who are here, notice if you want to become an educational psychologist, it's very similar to becoming a clinical psychologist. You have to basically graduate, and you need to have at least 1 year, I think, of working experience with a degree. And so one of the premier routes that is often recommended is what Laraib is doing right now, to become a system psychologist. And then if you have the work experience, you can apply to the doctorate. There are other ways to do that. I think Lucy and Dahaba did other ways, but as I think Laraib kind of alluded a little bit to it, and it used to be, I think things have changed. When I started 5 years ago, informing myself about how to become an educational or clinical psychologist, since then a lot has changed. It used to be that you have to become an assistant psychologist, things have changed and more options are available now, but this is why she's kind of like going this route. Lucy, maybe you can tell us, you are on the doctorate?
I am. Hi everyone. I'm Lucy. I'm currently in the second year training to be an EP, and I'm studying at UCL in London and on placement in Hounslow for the next 2 years. I graduated from City in 2019, actually the same year as Dahaba, but I did a placement year at City, so a 4-year course, so we kind of went in the same year group. And I'm not sure if City still do the pathways, but I did the child development pathway, like specialised in my final year. Similar to Laraib said, you kind of have to get on things quite early to have a job post-graduation. So I was keen to be a teacher, to have some more classroom experience before going into kind of the EP world. So I applied for that kind of early on in the autumn, actually, of my final year with Teach First. So when I graduated from the September, I started postgraduate teacher training and trained to be a reception teacher, so early years for 2 years. And then in my final year of that, I applied for the doctorate and was very lucky to get on first time. And yeah, I finished my first year at about nearly a term into my second year. And similar to Laraib said, I can definitely think of some good kind of tips and experience in. And I think it's really interesting to, like now I'm on the course, see the range of experience that we have on the course and all the different routes that people can take. Because I think, like you say, maybe you see assistant psychologist as the main one, but actually there's lots of different experience and things that are really valuable, which hopefully we'll speak about later.
Yes, that sounds great. Okay, so and I think here's the first clear difference between clinical psychology and educational psychology, right? You can, instead of becoming a system psychologist, you become a teacher and get valuable training that way. Dahaba, if I'm correct, you did something like a third route, right? This is as almost as we planned it. Could you tell us a little bit, like you're also on the doctorate, but like what did you after you graduated?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Dahaba, and I'm also one of the other trainee educational psychologists currently on the doctorate, like Lucy. I'm studying at University of East London, and I guess my journey kind of started during my undergrad. I did a lot of volunteering with charities. And also I did mentoring and I did some coaching work. I think it was between my second and third year. So I used to actually take a lot of time out of uni to do this extracurricular kind of activities that I did outside of my own time. And then after I graduated, I got a job as an ABA tutor. So I worked with children with autism. And then after that, I went into and to become an education mental health practitioner or educational wellbeing practitioner, which is part of the mental health support teams in schools. And then after doing that for a bit, I think last year last year or the year before that, when I also did the careers talk at City, I was an education wellbeing practitioner. And then I applied for the doctorate, and I think in that talk I did say that I was going to apply to the doctorate, and yeah, here I am, and I got on as well, thankfully, because it is a very daunting and competitive process.
Okay, I have a question for all of you before we talk a little bit, and then Emilia, I hope that's okay. If I like just question the three. You, Laraib and Lucy, did a placement year, which I'm a big fan of. I was like, as you might remember, I was like 2 placement years, but maybe this is wrong. Maybe I shouldn't push it. And it seems like the other thing I really say students should do is they should volunteer. They should take up these opportunities. And maybe Dahaba, you could kind of reflect a little bit on that. And then maybe Lucy and Laraib, you could talk about that too. So for Lucy and Laraib, the placement years, and for you, Dahaba, the volunteering, the coaching, the mentoring. was that helpful? Was that not? What did it like? Is it like, okay, was it helpful maybe in kind of just for the CV or for your application, but also in terms of skills, things you learned that then kind of helped you, or maybe not? I think this is not, as I always say, it's not a propaganda event. If you felt like this was a complete waste of time, I wish I didn't do it, then please let us know so that I don't recommend that to our students.
No, the experiences were fantastic. So I volunteered with Coach Bright, an organization called Coach Bright. And what they do is at the beginning, they actually give you training on like how to coach pupils. And then I went into secondary schools to actually do some one-to-one work with pupils who were closer to their exam was the GCSE exams. So I kind of helped them out for the summer term, and I did some one-to-one work, and I went in there weekly, so once a week. It was a very good experience, I would say, and that's where my interest in educational psychology just sparked, because I just thought this is what I enjoy doing. Like I enjoyed going in and doing this. I was using all sorts of like psychology that I probably wasn't even aware of at the time to deliver the sessions. And then I also volunteered with Pursuing Independent Paths, which is actually an adult learning like needs charity. They actually came in to do a talk at City, so I think I dropped them an email and they were happy to have me over once a week as well. So I did that. Actually, no, that was twice a week. And then I also was a City buddy. So those were like all experiences that I was able to put together and talk about even in my doctoral application, and I did put them down, because voluntary work and paid work, I think they're both equally important, because it ultimately is about the skills that you're gaining from those experiences.
Okay, very impressive. Cool. Lucy, what did you do in your placement year?
Yeah, so first, actually, I might just speak off of the back of what Dahaba said. At City, I was a widening participation student ambassador, and that's working with young people in schools, going into their schools, as well as when they come and visit the university. And I think that is a really fantastic opportunity to get more experience working with young people in quite a unique kind of role and context. And I'm quite passionate about sort of increasing access to further education and sort of educational inequality. So I really enjoyed that role for those reasons. And as well, I was a student ambassador for like the open days and things. And I think what Dahaba was saying made me think about how it's not necessarily the experience, but I suppose my big takeaway is like how you talk about it and how you sell it and what you can reflect on. And that actually, if you think about a student ambassador role, I gave tours, I did talks, but actually I was interacting with young people, I was interacting with parents, I was having to talk in front of a lot of people. You're developing so many skills that is actually really key in the EP role, which you might not think of at the time. So really kind of think about how you can talk about what you've done, not necessarily what it might look like on paper, but really what you learn from it. My placement year, I worked at the UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. And I was a research assistant in the psychological medicine team. So that was focused on children and young people who were patients at Great Ormond Street Hospital. So they had quite severe medical needs, and focused around mental health research in those populations, particularly 2 projects on better understanding support that is available for those suffering from cystic fibrosis, as well as their siblings and families and parents. And the second project was developing cognitive behavioural therapy specifically for young people with epilepsy. And I think that experience really helped me, one, get on to training to be a teacher in terms of all the experience and skills and knowledge that I'd gained, but as well in my application for the doctorate, in terms of really getting that broad experience. And I think it is a really good way of setting you apart, in my opinion, from just having a kind of a 3-year undergraduate degree, but kind of having some relevant experience already. And even if it's maybe, I loved my year, but maybe if you end up actually not loving the role so much, or actually think, I don't know if this is something for me, that's still something really useful that you've gained from that year, whether it's kind of positive or whether actually you think, oh, I didn't really like this aspect, maybe I want to go down a different path, or actually I found something new that I didn't know about and that's the route I want to go down. So I think, yeah, it's a really good way while you're still at uni of getting that like a whole year's worth of work experience. And I think personally it does set you well apart from others in what you can talk about.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think like we had the placement conference where we have people who are just coming back, and I would say 1 in 10 do the placement. Like, oh my God, this is not for me. I think it's super valuable to know what's not for you, especially if you can kind of, I think, rule something out as like, oh, I don't want to do anything with mental health. That gives you a lot of clarity of where not to go. Could I, and maybe Laraib, you could comment on that as well, if that applies. But could I ask one follow-up question, Lucy? And it's like, it sounds very clinical as well, what you did, right? You were like Great Almond Street. You did a lot centered around therapy. What was it that you decided not to go into clinical psychology, but to educational? Or was it just like, did you apply both paths? Because I think with Dahaba, it seems like everything she did during, it's very clear educational. Like with you, it's like, what was it that's just like educational psychology and not clinical psychology? Or maybe you tried both, I don't know.
That's a good question. I think clinical hadn't, if I'm honest, wasn't ever really too much on my radar. I was very focused in young people, and I enjoy working with children and young people and sort of parents and families. And I think there's, in my opinion, more, there's a lot more scope and focus of that in the EP role as opposed to clinical. I think the placement year role appealed to me because it was specifically, the psychological medicine team that was focused on, children. And thinking back to it, although perhaps it was more of a medical kind of research orientated placement, it was day to day, meeting with young people. How can we best engage them? How are we developing materials and parents and families? And I think it made me realise that, physical difficulties have such a huge impact on mental health, but also where that then translates to a young person's just whole life from a social perspective, from learning academically, and kind of really wanting to be in more of a role that takes a bit more of a holistic look, not just at mental health, but actually how are they finding things in school, cognition and learning. And I think that's something that I really love about training to be an EP, is being able to think about all those different things that's going on for a young person. And I think that's what kind of made me, gain that really useful experience, but also go, actually, I don't think I want to be sort of go into research full time, but I'm going to take all of those things that I've seen, and I really want to actually be more involved in improving outcomes for young people.
So is it like, just to kind of like, if I'm a student and I'm like, oh, I love children, right? And it's like, okay, and I want to do something within like the broader kind of like, yes, mental health, but also maybe a little bit more, not just in clinical settings, but outside. That is what draws you. Then I should maybe go for educational psychology. And when I'm more narrowly focused on these, or I'm really interested in these clinical settings, then I should go more into clinical. Is that kind of a fair? Just to kind of like, if I'm listening and I'm as a student, I think like, oh, what should I do? Should I do work in clinical settings with children as a clinical psychologist, or should I think it looks to me like Emilia would love to say something about that. Yes, please go ahead.
That's a big question. And I think lots of students, I often meet and work with students who are debating whether to go for clinical or educational. What I'll say is that they're both excellent routes, but there are some key differences that need to be taken into account. And I don't know whether it's necessarily to do with, the setting, because many clinical psychologists work in the community as well. So their role is quite broad as well. It's not just the educational psychologist role, which is broad. I suppose the way I made that decision, because I wasn't sure which route to go down and I didn't really mind. I thought they were both really appealing routes. Was if you've made a decision that you definitely want to work with children, and working with children in the community and working with children with a range of additional needs is what you want to do, then yes, educational is the way to go. if you have any doubt as to whether you want to work across the lifespan with both adults and children, then I'd say definitely clinical, because that gives you the option to do both. So if you're unsure, it's good to have that opportunity. But having said that, you know, they're both excellent routes to go to. Oh, there's also other considerations as well in terms of the funding and the, you know, the training as well. So with the clinical route, well, they're both funded. Well, they're funded in a slightly different way. So for clinical, I think most, if not all, trainees have an actual contract. So it's an employment contract with the NHS. With education, you do get your fees paid and you get an allowance, which is tax-free, but that's not the same as, you know, being on a contract. So the difference isn't, you know, I suppose, well, just judging by the fact that they do seem to be, both are very competitive processes. I think part of that is because there is the funding associated with them, which other applied psychology courses unfortunately don't always get. But there is a difference there as well, which I would advise, you know, everyone who's interested in making that decision to do that research before that, because it may be that one of the two training routes works better for you, just in terms of the practical arrangements.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, okay, this is good. Yeah, I've never thought about this. I'm just listening to Lucy and thought, like, I wonder why she went for education or not. And it reminds me a little bit of Laraib, what you said, because she's like, oh, you said of your role right now. She's like, oh, I'm surprised how clinical it is in some ways, right? But maybe could you just tell us what you did for your placement year? Sorry, just like.
I actually didn't do a placement year, Andreas. I actually did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's okay.
Okay.
So I know a lot of people that did placements, and that really helped them.
Okay. Okay. Now I understand your comment in the beginning, because you recognize people who went on placement, came back, and they're finishing. And okay, fantastic. So all right. Then maybe we could kind of like go back from Laraib to Lucy to Dahaba again, and so. You all, maybe first you could, like, it seems like you might not, when you finished your degree, you had some relevant work experience, either volunteering or placement. Did you know, I want to do educational psychology? And then what's your strategy? I think we have like these three different ways kind of to go about. I think there are other ways you can probably like get the relevant work experience as well. But Lara, how did you, it sounded like you want to be a system psychologist, and that was, did you apply for other things? How did you, like, what was your strategy after you graduated?
Well, actually, can I talk about before I graduated, because it kind of goes.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. So before I graduated, I was doing volunteering in my third year. So I was working with a company called Corn Beanstalk, and what they do is that they hire reading helpers that sit with students in primary schools, and they do sessions each week, and then you sort of use psychology if you want to, which is what I did, to help those students enjoy reading. And so the job description wasn't really using psychology, but because I was doing psychology, I sort of used it. And then I learned a lot about how to use evidence to help students learn. And then I also use that to talk about in my interviews. And so kind of using evidence-based practice in your work is something that I found was really important and beneficial. Along with that, I was also a widening participation helper at City, like Lucy. And that was when I really realized that I want to go into educational psychology, because I just loved working with those students. It was so much fun, and they were just so sweet that I thought, do you know what, educational psychology might be the thing for me. And I was also a bit confused with educational psychology and clinical psychology, because I know that if you go into the mindset with using educational psychology as I'm only going to work with children, that's not true. So although you are going to work with children, you're also going to be working with a lot of adults. What that means is that educational psychologists have meeting with parents, and parents a lot of the times of these children have mental health issues. So right now I'm working with an educational psychologist, and I'm also working with a clinical psychologist. And the difference I've noticed is that the educational psychologist does assessments with the children, but the educational psychologist doesn't really do any mental health related stuff with the children, while the clinical psychologist does do mental health related things, but they don't work with the children, they work with the parents. I hope I haven't lost anyone with that. Also, I
think it's sorry to interrupt, Larry. Just to clarify, I think it's worth emphasising as well that educational psychologists can deliver mental health interventions. I mean, obviously, it's always a question of capacity, but as I'm sure Lucy and Dahaba may be able to tell us a little bit more about that. But as part of the training, usually you do get, as part of the doctorate, some training on some therapeutic modes. So, for example, in my case, that was CBT and therapeutic play. Lucy and Habit may have been different for you, but you can also do therapeutic work as an educational psychologist. But Larry, you're absolutely right that actually the majority of the, the direct therapeutic work would usually be done by clinical psychologists. But we are also trained in that kind of domain.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. It seems also because I think we have this how to become an educational psychologist. Lawrence Berridge gives this talk. He works for Islington, the Council of Islington, around the corner here, and he's basically schools hire him and to kind of work on some things, and he would sometimes also work with the teachers on how to deliver evidence-based interventions to their students. So yeah, it's not just, I think now when you said that, he works with parents, he works also with teachers a lot to kind of help them understand things. So yeah, I think it's probably also really depends on once you've finished on what kind of job you do. Okay, so you are done with your degree. It's May 2021, I think. No, it's just this, right? You just 2022. You just it's this year, right? And then it's what do you do?
Right. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So when it was around May, I thought that I need to start getting some actual work experience rather than just volunteering. So I started applying to a bunch of jobs, and so some of the jobs were you just send your CV and then they call you for an interview. And then other assistant psychologist jobs were you fill out an application, which is what I did. Along with that, I wasn't really sure if I was going to get the job because they were really hard, they were really hard to get at the time. So I also started applying for jobs like teaching assistants, and that was my backup. So while I was waiting to hear back from the company, I was also working, I did some work as an examiner. I also, not like an examiner, but the people that are walking around in exams, I've forgotten what they're called, but right, those people. I also did some work as a teaching assistant temporarily. And so I had all of these backup plans, and I was hoping to get the job, but I did some work at a nursery, and all of that was just to learn a bit more and to get a bit more experience working in educational settings. And then I was hoping to get the job as an assistant psychologist, which I then did. And then my backup plan was gone. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So this is good. I always sometimes students come to me and like, oh, should I apply as a teacher? Should I apply as a well-being practitioner? Should I apply as a system psychologist? I think you should do all. That's my general advice. Okay, Lucy, did you have a similar strategy?
Yeah, I think, like you say, you do have to cast the net quite wide, and it is best to, not have all your eggs in one basket, especially with everything being so competitive. I just wanted to pick up on one point earlier about the difference between clinical and educational. I think in sort of the political, economic, social, everything world that we are in at the moment, the roles are overlapping more because schools are seeing a lot more mental health needs are increasing, and that actually because of wait lists and lots of funding and lots of other things, actually educational psychologists are playing quite a key role in supporting schools to meet those needs, whether that is working directly with a child or delivering some training to teachers or to support that school. So I think it's definitely an area that you might not expect to do a lot of work in initially if you don't know much about the role, but it's definitely, I would say, increasing and probably will continue to increase in the next few years.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Lawrence, I had him 2 weeks ago. He gave a workshop in my third year elective, and he said the same thing. Yeah, it's a lot of schools come and say, "Well, we have a lot of issues. Can you fix them with one intervention?" Yeah, and just make all children happy. And how you negotiate these expectations. Okay, yes. But you applied for teach. Did you apply for something else after you graduated, or what was your strategy?
Yeah, I applied for Teach First, and that was motivated very much that it's a funded teacher training route, and it is intense. It is difficult, but it's very learn on the job, and that's what I was keen to do. I did also apply for Frontline, which is to train to be a child and family social worker, which at the time I just really wanted some more experience with young people and different populations. I was fortunate to get both, and I think then that's when I kind of have that sort of gut feeling of what do I actually want to do, and it was very immediate for me that it was teaching and the classroom, and I'm very pleased that I did that. I think it's not the assistant psychologist role is often seen as the sort of be all and end all to get on to doctorates. But I think it is a fantastic opportunity and fantastic role to get that experience. But speaking from who else I'm studying with at the moment, there's people who were teachers, there's people who are TAs, there's people who did ABA tutoring, there's people who did more of a social care sort of research background, youth offending, like a really wide range of experience. And I think that it is valued from the course when they're looking at who they want to be on their programme. They probably don't want a class of 18 assistant psychologists. That it is worth casting that net wide and thinking about all the different kind of roles that you would still develop those skills and work with those populations in different ways. What was I going to say? Was there another question? My mind's gone blank. Sorry.
Okay, let's just hold it. Will come when Dahaba talks. Dahaba, could you? I know you did a little bit of AB. Is it tutor or a therapist or I don't? Yeah, which is like maybe you can. Most of our students probably don't know what that is. Maybe you can just say a little bit about that. I think in our other recording you talked more about this, and I think this is on our Moodle page. Yeah. So you don't have to, but just to kind of quickly say what it is and then why you did it maybe, and then how did you become an educational wellbeing practitioner? I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis, and it's a therapy for children with autism. And it involves kind of using principles of behaviorism, so the concept of rewarding desirable behavior and maybe putting other behaviors on extinction. And then there's a whole structure that you need to, that I had to follow, that was tailored, that was under the school of behaviorism, and that was specific to ABA, where I taught children kind of with social skills, communication. It was one-to-one work that I did with them. It was very intense, and the company that I worked with was called Young Autism Project, and the hours were very long, so I used to actually do one-to-one work with those children from 9 to 5, and they had about 15 different programs that all worked on different areas of their development. So some would be working on their oral skills, some will be fine motor, some will be their receptive skills, expressive skills. ABA does have its weaknesses as well, to be honest, because especially the company that I worked with, they were very strong on behaviorism, and I just don't think that you can use one theory or one school of thought to understand the child. I think there's a need for more of a holistic understanding to kind of help the child achieve their actual potential, and that's another reason that that's another thing that kind of confirmed my reason for my desire for becoming an educational psychologist, because I just thought, with educational psychology, we're able to draw on so many different theories, to make sense of what's going on for the child. And it's not just one school of thought. And it's very diverse. Like the work that we do is very diverse. We can do assessments which come in, you know, sometimes are structured, some standardized, some are a bit more flexible. We do consultation with teachers, we do and parents as well. We're also involved in research, and we do a lot of training. So training can come in one-to-one, like one-to-one training with a teacher, a TA. We do like a group training, we do a whole intervention, like a whole school training, which is a bit more organizational. And we actually deliver a lot of therapeutic work, and sometimes we do like group interventions, and that's based on whatever you feel like is suited to that group. So there is a lot of flexibility in terms of the psychology that you can draw on when you want to deliver the work that you're doing, which I really appreciate, because, you know, sometimes I just don't think you can use one theory or one method and apply it to every child or every situation.
That was very beautiful, nicely put. I think, yes, and it's kind of like touching ABA is like a very specific approach to autism. I have actually like a friend of mine, they did it and it worked very well for the child, but it has certain limits, and I think, yes, it doesn't sound like, I mean, 9 to 5. That sounds pretty crazy. Could you like tell us a little bit like the educational well-being practitioner, where you did that and what that entailed? That would be, I think, yes.
So I applied through, I think the advertisements come up on the NHS website. So there's educational wellbeing practitioner, also known as education mental health practitioner. And there's also another role that's very closely related to this role called child wellbeing practitioner. I think one works in the community. The child wellbeing practitioner works in the community, and the educational wellbeing or mental health practitioner predominantly works in school. So it's all about supporting children and young people at school. So they were based on CBT principles. So I use cognitive behavioral therapy is interventions based on CBT. And we worked on children that had, I worked with children that had mild to moderate mental health needs, such as anxiety and low mood. So I actually did one-to-one interventions with them, and the sessions were structured. And I think there were about 8 sessions from the program that we followed. There was the intervention manual, they call it, and you also get training. You also get trained at a university. So at the beginning, it's a diploma. So at the end, you get a diploma, and you're also funded. So you get a salary, a diploma, and your days would be split between university and going into schools and doing the therapeutic work that you've learned at university. And you will also have like a supervisor that will be supervising the work that you do during your training year. And then the following year, once you qualify, I think you go up a band in terms of salary, and you go in and deliver your own work, and you get allocated schools. So you deal with any cases that are, you know, mild to moderate mental health needs that are from those schools. And I also did, there was also another area that we focused on, which was challenging behaviour. But that was only for the younger children, and we did training with the parents. So it would be more about training the parent to train, not to train, but to help their, to manage their child's challenging behaviour.
Okay. It's like, just to kind of maybe transition into the doctorate, like like 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had Laraib. I don't know, you might know her, might not her. Laraib, Labiba, sorry. Labiba, she was a psychological well-being, she's a psychological well-being practitioner, the clinical. And at the end that turn out that there's like this big discussion about whether psychological well-being practitioners should be allowed to apply for a doctorate, when they should be, because the NHS feels like, okay, we just invested in you, you're done with your training, technically now you fulfill all the requirements to go to the doctorate, and basically everyone on wants to go into a doctorate, and they feel like, this is not why we educate you to go to a program. Is there like a similar discussion happening in the educational realm, or is that just a clinical thing?
Yeah, so I came across that debate that was going on, and I think it was mainly focused on clinical, and it was mainly about the PWP, which is the People's Wellbeing Practitioner, and also another role, which is the Clinical Associate Psychologist as well, which is also another mental health NHS kind of related thingy. But I don't, well, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I don't know if you guys think the same or different, but I didn't think that it related to the educational psychology or impacted the educational psychology doctorate.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it would be worth double checking just in case, but I'm 99% sure that that's not the case.
Okay.
I think it's to do with the funding as well, because both of these positions, so both the trainee clinical psychologist and the psychological wellbeing practitioner posts, are funded by the NHS, if I'm not mistaken. So I think there's a rule there around how many NHS funded course you can take, whereas with the educational psychology doctorate, it's funded by I believe the Department for Education. I should really know that, considering I've actually received the funding. But yeah, it's from a completely different source. So
I see.
To my knowledge, that's not the case, but always worth double checking just in case the rules have changed.
Yeah, I think it was just like very interesting for us because I always like recommend like both of these roles as a kind of like an ideal springboard to get into the doctorate. You have a job, you get paid, and you acquire the necessary experience to apply. And then even if you don't get in, I mean, Dahaba, you got in, so that's great. But even you still can keep on working. And I just want to make sure that my recommendations are not kind of like leading you into a trap where you're suddenly. Okay, so maybe Laraib, if this is okay, Lucy and Dahaba can tell a little bit about like you applied for the doctorate. This is similarly competitive in educational psychology. It is a paid doctorate. I think it's 3 years, right? As well as the clinical. What do you think for both of you? Is there something where you think that really made a difference? I mean, obviously you kind of fulfilled all the check boxes. You got a good degree, you had the work experience, but what on top of that? What do you think, like, why are you on the program and somebody else isn't? Do you feel like you have an insight into that? Maybe you don't. I mean, maybe Lucy, you start.
I'm not sure if I know an insight. Like I said, I was very fortunate to get on first time, and I had interviews at the places I applied to and had a choice of places in the end, which I was very fortunate to have. I think it is a lot about it. It's how you talk about your experience and how you sell it, and the skills that you developed. I think depending the universities that you're applying to, they can give you more information. Some give more than others about exactly what they're looking for. Unfortunately, you just write one personal statement for all the universities that you apply for, so you obviously can't tailor it too heavily. Yeah, I would just say the key is like really being reflective. Like that's a huge part of being a psychologist, regardless of the discipline, I think, and just really thinking about what you've done and how you've applied psychology day to day. I think it's really interesting. You said, Laraib, about how you thought about it in your role of, helping with the reading, and just really thinking about every job, whether that's voluntary or any experience you've had, and actually what psychology is about people's behavior and how we all think and how we all learn, and there is pretty much links to almost everything. I would say you can make a link there somewhere. So just really thinking carefully about reflecting on how that's developed your skills, how that made you think about a certain aspect of psychology. And I think definitely you can be really broad. I know Dahaba mentioned sort of behaviorist as one approach, but thinking about all the different things that you learn on the undergraduate course, really you could you can go so far with the links that you can make and where psychology applies. So I suppose my top tip would be getting that good experience and putting in the work and the effort to do that and apply. And it is long, applications are long, and it is time consuming, but that is what it is, unfortunately. But it is just how you talk about that, and really spending some time to think about, what did I learn at uni, and like, what has it made me think of, or good and bad, reflecting on positives and negatives, of how you're working with people, whether that's young people, whether that's someone in a school, whether that's a parent, a family, other professionals as well. We work with clinical psychologists, we work with psychiatrists, we work with speech and language therapists. So you might have done a different role which put you in contact with one of them that has developed all those different skills. So I think go from sort of just thinking lots, basically, and thinking hard about how you can best sort of sell what you've done, rather than necessarily going, oh, I've got to tick that I've worked in a school, or I have to have done this, or I have to have done that, but actually how you can how it's developed and shaped you and your skills.
Just like, Dahaba, before you answer, I think this is like one of the things, like basically in every talk that has, and I mean, I can see you're good at reflection. You all really kind of have a really good way of looking back of your experience and readily can describe them with quite detail and a level of reflection. It's just like, for me, I often feel like I wish, it's easy to say, oh, here's this program, here's the link, here's the apply, and also make sure that you are really reflective. Dahaba, I don't know if you agree that reflection is something really important. Do you have a tip for like how to develop that? Like, because it seems something maybe you have to develop with another person to get feedback to. I don't know, like, how did you go about that? Like writing your dissertation, your application for the doctorate, like,
I completely agree with everything that Lucy said, and she's pretty much covered all the points. But I would say, in terms of like reflecting, there's so many different reflection kind of frameworks or models that you can follow. And think, if you just do a quick Google search, you would just have so many different ones where they would actually guide you step by step, the things that you need to think about in order to have a really in-depth reflection of an experience. So it's really worth like implementing those when you want to develop your skills on like how to reflect. The questions are really specific. And I would say, I know Lucy said this like so many times, but just talk about how you apply psychology in it, and draw theories that you've learned in the undergrad, or maybe you've come across after graduating, and how you've implemented those in your practice. I think is really crucial. And I would say just there's a lot. I would say just give the application a go as well. If you feel like that you've met the minimum requirements, just give it a go, because sometimes you might just feel like that, you just don't have enough experience, or you need to get more experience and more experience, but you will just never know with your luck. Like, I was fortunate enough to have also gotten on the first time of applying, but I didn't, at one point even think that I stood a chance applying. But I guess that's just taught me that it's just worth giving it a try, really. Did that answer your question, Andreas?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I think it's just like, for me, listening to you guys, if you're like, oh, they're so good at doing this, and I think like, oh, maybe it would be great to have somebody who maybe is not yet quite there, so it's not so intimidating for our students just to listen to you guys. And it's like, oh wow, yeah, I wish I could describe my experience as beautiful as they do. It takes a while. I always tell, I don't know if you, what do you think about that? I always strongly encourage all of my students to get feedback. I think all of my personal tutees who apply for educational and clinical psychology role, like the doctorate, the first time I see the application, I'm like, oh, I think we have to do some work. So I think it's kind of like, if you have that, I don't know if you did that, I think it's another thing to kind of ideally from somebody who knows you, and just like, look, you like there are 10 more amazing things you have done and you're just forgetting it, just saying, oh, and then I did this AB role, and it's like, do you remember it was like blah blah blah. Yeah. So I think sometimes it's good to get somebody else's perspective and just to remember how wonderful you are. Emilia, do you have any other insights into like the application? And then I want to also learn a little bit about the interviews. I think that's like another part I'm curious about. Yeah, Emilia, do you want to say anything else about beyond that?
Yeah, sure. So I think a really important point when it comes to the preparation and making a decision as to whether you're ready to to apply is, so you may never get to a point where you feel completely ready, and so that's worth bearing in mind. And you have to make a decision that's right for you and that you can live with, as as cliched as that sounds, just because for some people giving the application a go is great. I mean, that's what I did, and much in the same way as Lucy and Dahaba, I then found myself in a very fortunate position with multiple offers. But that's not always going to be the case for everyone, because it is a very competitive route, and it's also worth thinking about, and now going into that reflective mode about how you may deal with rejection. And for some people it's actually okay, and it's better to wait a little bit if you know that actually not getting the outcome that you wanted is going to make you question your capabilities, which, by the way, don't do that. There's so many excellent people who apply every year. It's just that there's not enough places on the doctorate, and that's really unfortunate, because we desperately need more EPs in this country, but there's not enough space, and there's thousands of excellent applicants who apply every year. So in terms of just to give a little bit more information about the I suppose the more boring side of the application process, because Laraib, Lucy and Dahaba have already given you all the information you need in terms of the actual, the process and the experience that you may need. So it's very, very important to familiarise yourself as early as possible with the application process and with the there's a portal that's used to apply on the Association of Educational Psychologists website. So you can just, you can look this up just by Googling it. And that includes a lot of very useful information about the courses. You can also check each individual course's website. There's only a certain number of courses in the country. I'm not sure how many they are at the moment. I'd say about 13. But that's a question that I often get asked from people who are in the very early stages of applying. Well, is this something that every university offers? And no, it definitely isn't. There's a relatively small number of universities that do the courses, because they need to be accredited, and there's all sorts of other things that they need to do. So make sure you familiarise yourselves with with each individual course's requirements, because they are, on the whole, they are very similar. So you need to have experience of working with children and young people and their families in a setting. So again, this doesn't need to be as an assistant psychologist. Larry, I'm so impressed that you managed to get an assistant psychology job. That is impressive, because they're really hard to come by. So if you do get one, incredible, that's amazing, and you should be very proud of yourself. But if you don't, that's absolutely fine as well, because as other people said, the vast majority of people on the course, from my experience, it sounds like from Lucy's experience, from Dahaba's experience, they actually weren't assistant EP. So brilliant experience if you can get it, but don't worry if you can't. So any role that's kind of paid and involves working with children, young people and families is relevant. The most important thing is how you've applied psychological theory and how you kind of translate that into a coherent narrative in your application form. So really, that's why it's so important to make to really think about the different courses, because they have slightly different perspectives. They focus on slightly different things. So make sure you do that. Like, for example, the Tavistock course, which is the Tavistock and Portland NHS Trust, they have a very significant therapeutic focus and mental health focus, and their trainees I believe they do a placement in their first year of training. They do a placement in child and adolescent mental health services in the NHS. I believe that's still the case, but I'll need to check with my colleagues who actually trained there. So the different courses have slightly different ethos, so it's very important to check that, and in order to make the right decision. And then when it comes to the interview, Well, that varies massively from one course to another. Some courses will have, I believe most of them actually will have a practical task of some sort in addition to the more structured interview. But then again, here really the main thing is about showing how you've applied psychology, that you understand the role of the educational psychologist. So if you don't know any educational psychologist, it's, you know, a good idea to see if you can reach out to someone. I mean, having said that, I didn't really have much direct experience of working with EPs because there's just not that many EPs in the country. We're quite a small profession. So don't worry too much if you don't have that experience, but if you have any way of maybe having a discussion with, you know, whether it would be an, you know, a trainee or a qualified EP, that's always a good strategy. Yeah, I mean, I'm conscious, Lucy and Dahaba, you've been through the process more recently than me. Do you have any top tips or suggestions based on that in terms of the kind of people who kind of got to that stage?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to go, Lucy. There's always that awkward moment of not knowing who's going to talk. Yeah, so in terms of like tips, I would say in the interviews, I don't know, just there's a lot of like skills. They're not, I guess in the interviews, they're not just looking for the amount of knowledge that you know about educational psychology, but it's more about the skills that you show, like show that you can listen and, you know, paraphrase what someone said to you, and then maybe say it back to them. There's also a writing task where you'll, well, I know that they will just be asked a question and then you just need to quickly write under like a time condition. Was it about 20 minutes? So again, there's no like pressure to, it's not about the extent that you write, but it's more about, I guess in that task, they're just looking for your basic kind of English skills. And if you're able to just like write a sentence that's grammatically correct. And then in the panel interviews is where you should kind of really show your reflection, being reflective, and also how you've applied psychology throughout. And as Emilia was saying, I guess it's also important to take into consideration or just have at the back of your mind the values of each university and what they really prioritize. I know at UEL is more about social justice and autonomy and, you know, beneficence, so that's like doing good, and just try to incorporate that in the way that you answer the questions that you're asked. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a very good example of why it's important to make sure that you understand what each individual course is more focused on, because ultimately you have to make sure that, you know, that has to be something that you believe in too, in order to be able to demonstrate that commitment during the interview process. And I think something else that's really important is around understanding the broad scope of the educational psychologist's role. So really understanding that it's not just a matter of doing assessments and individual work with children. Actually, we do so much more than that in terms of, you know, supervision of other professionals, reflective supervision to, you know, for example, I do quite a lot of work with social workers, and that's something that many other EPs do. The research side of it as well, the, you know, the more academic side, many EPs also have additional academic kind of roles, myself included, as well as being an EP. I'm an associate lecturer at the Open University. So really kind of thinking about the really broad range of the role that makes it, I think this is what makes it really appealing and really attractive. But I think as much as you're not expected to know like every single thing about, you know, the role of the EP, because at the end of the day, you know, why would you know that? You've never done the job. Of course, you wouldn't know necessarily what the day-to-day life of an EP is like, unless you were, you know, well, if you worked as an assistant, you probably would have a fairly good idea. But it's about understanding the basics in terms of, yes, we do direct work with children, absolutely, but there's also a massive systemic focus on what we do. So supporting the, you know, not just schools, but also local authorities, families, the entire system around the child, the communities. So yes, and I think, Laraib, you made such a good point earlier today that actually it's not just about, we do actually do quite a lot of work with adults, and it's worth bearing in mind as well that in the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice, it covers children from 0 to 25, and we work with children and young people and young adults from 0 to 25. So all of these things are really important and worth bearing in mind.
Okay, I'm slightly conscious of the time. I think we're kind of up with time. Could I just, like, at the end, before it gets too cozy, ask you what's the worst thing about being an educational psychologist? I think so far it's all great, and but I think maybe just from your impression, what are you don't have to call it the worst. I think what are really challenging aspects, right, about being an educational psychologist? This could be quite different, whatever you feel applies to you. But I think it's good to know some of the challenges when you go into a job and not expect that you're I don't know, the savior of children every day, or I don't know what fantastical ideas we might have. So yeah, maybe Laraib, you could just start whatever you feel like, and and then Lucy and Dahaba, and maybe Emilia, you want to say something too at the end, and then I think we could come to an end. If anyone from the students in the chat, if you want to have a question, you can just pop it in the chat, and I would ask the question to the panel. But maybe Laraib, you could start.
Yeah, I think one thing that I found personally challenging, and I know that the educational psychologists I work with also find challenging, is the fact that because you're working with children, and these children are in school, so a lot of the times they might have certain behavior policies that don't necessarily work well with children with autism or children with SEN needs. So for example, children who are autistic don't really do well if you're shouting at them. And a lot of the times teachers will shout, or if they're doing something wrong, then they'll get into trouble. And so these things don't really help the students, but at the same time, it's quite systemic. So you have to kind of go to the top, and then you have to work your way down, and you have to speak to the head teacher, and you have to sort of get the school to think about their behavioral policies and then change them. And so because you're not only working with the child, you're also working with the school and all those people related to the child, it's a bit frustrating because you can't just do things in that moment to help. So you have to sort of work with all these people who might have different opinions and they might have different beliefs to then implement support for that child. But yeah, I think that's one thing that can be quite frustrating at times.
Okay, Lucy, how about your experiences so far?
Yeah, I'm kind of sort of similar to Laraib. I think a lot of it is actually about the work that we do and schools and staff's awareness of that work, and parents' even awareness of what our job and what our role is. And it is often a challenge to kind of negotiate that, or maybe challenge some assumptions about the work that we might be doing or not be doing, and sort of having that professional confidence to say, actually, this is the route I'm going to go, or I don't think that's going to be helpful, or actually think our time would be best used doing something else. And I think it is working with those systems. We're working with schools and we're working with families, and that's a huge part of the role. And it is also a big, I would say, quite a challenging part of the role to, like Laraib said, sometimes have to kind of go against what might be the done way of doing things, but as well sort of every day sort of reminding people of what you're there to do, and always be the advocate for the child is sometimes a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Dahaba, how about?
For me, I would say, well, particularly now that I'm a trainee, so I'm attending university and also doing placement days. I would say the biggest challenge currently for me is time management. I have a thesis proposal that's due in 2 days. So there's that I need to think about, but also all the work that I need to do with the children, all the report writing that comes with that as well. So yeah, there's just so much to do, but very little time. So it's really really crucial that time is managed really efficiently, and you allocate time to doing different things. And sometimes I might be doing something and I would be thinking about a report that I need to write, or or something else that I need to do that's not what I'm doing in the moment. So I find, yeah, balancing both university and placement, sometimes it can be challenging, especially when the demand's so high.
Yeah, I think as well in the role, it's about, you are very much managing your own like workload. I'm sure you'd agree, Emilia, and you might have the schools that you're working in and the work that you've got to do, and the onus really is on you to organize your time in school and meetings with parents and the times you're going to do and when you're going to write things by, and it does require a lot of like self-directed initiative and time management skills to do those things. So if that's maybe something you struggle with, then it's probably worth thinking about, because you do have to do that day in, day out of when am I, it's no one's telling you, oh, go in on Monday and do that work and you should spend this amount of time. Like, that is you having to, do all that logistical organisation.
I think that the key challenge for me as a kind of someone who's qualified maybe it's my third year of practice now. So the biggest challenge, I think, that it becomes very, very obvious very quickly, is that there's just not enough VPs. And there is a shortage of VPs at the moment, and that's very noticeable. I'd say in my case, the second I qualified, even before that, actually, even as a trainee, it was very obvious. So yeah, because there's a huge demand, which is a positive, because you are generally very, everyone wants, your time. People are generally quite happy to see you when you go on visits, which is lovely. But there's just not enough. There's not enough of us, which means that we can't necessarily do all of the things that we want to do, because we have to. There's quite a lot of work to do and not enough people to do it, and that's across the country. That's not in one specific area. That is the case nationally. Yeah, we have this contrast of not having enough people, but at the same time having lots of applicants who don't get on the call. So I really hope that changes in the future, because we definitely need more people in the profession.
Okay, I think I have a classic question from Philippa, and we can, I think, happy to address that in the moment. I think I just want to, and Sophia raises her hand. That's fantastic. Dahaba, knowing that you have so little time, now I feel really bad that I lured you into this event. And all of you. Yeah, I think, so if you're happy, then we would just take these questions. I think there's Sophia raises her hand, so I think you can just talk next, but maybe I read Philippa's out. I think she asked about work experience. Is it essential to have work experience post-grad before applying for the PhD? I think there's an easy answer. So it's not a PhD, it's a doctorate. As a person who has a PhD, that's important to me, but not to nobody else here. That's perfectly fine, but it's a doctorate. And you have to have work experience with your degree in order to apply, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. You definitely
so
need postgraduate experience. Yeah, that's a definite.
So even if you did a placement that is like the perfect, I don't know, honorary assistant psychology in your educational setting, you need to do the same basically for a year after you graduated. Sophia, I hope, Philippa, that answers your question. Sophia, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, sorry, I wanted to unmute because I didn't want to assume something that was wrong because I arrived a little bit late. Lucy, I understood that you also had work as a teacher here in the UK. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not from here, but I would really love to be able to be here as long as possible. So what was the process for you as a teacher as well? Because I would really like to work in that setting as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak from experience about applying from like potentially an international perspective of kind of visas or things like that. But there are a lot of postgraduate teacher training options in the UK. Like I said, there are a mix. Some are funded and some you have to pay for. Personally, after doing a 4-year degree, because I did a placement year, I was very much only looking at funded routes into it. And I think Teach First is great for that. You learn on the job. You're very much, you know, I had a class from day one. You are thrown in the deep end. It is a challenge, and you're working in schools in high levels of, you know, areas of deprivation. So it's a really wonderful opportunity, but it is difficult. I think, yeah, I suppose just definitely look at the different options out there. There are, yeah, like I said, so many different postgraduate teaching options, and finding the one for you, but also probably cast the net wide, and maybe think of some other opportunities as well. But I think definitely like a psychology degree stands you in good stead to get onto teacher training. And it's all about still talk. If you want to have that job for when you finish, I applied like the autumn of my third year to begin the year after. But I think it's Teach First. It's quite a it's like a graduate scheme. It's quite a big program. They have a very quite a rigorous recruitment process. So you do have to start thinking about things quite early. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well. But definitely a fantastic route into being an EP, in my opinion, to get that classroom experience and knowledge of how things work in like the UK school system, what's feasible for teachers, and actually, work with parents every day. You work with families every day. Brilliant to develop all those skills. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And just to jump off that, Andreas, if it's okay, opening up to everyone, what have you seen for international students in your experience as well?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that question. Do you say what have we seen for international?
Yeah, for international students, to be able to follow the educational psychology route. I imagine you've worked with multiple very different people. Wondering if you have worked with any international people, if you know anything, just in general, not to get too deep. Just I find that this is a very personal question maybe, and I don't want to take up too much time of anyone else's questions.
Yeah, I mean, in some way, sorry, Dahaba, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that at some universities, they do have international trainee educational psychology positions. But I'm just not too sure on this.
I think it's it's a separate application system, and the AEP is for you have to you have to be kind of a UK permanent resident. And they definitely, universities like UCL takes international students, but it is a different route in, and it also isn't funded, I'm afraid, because so that's another thing to consider.
Yes, I think that's very much similar with the clinical route, where it's they take you in, but they don't give you money. But I think it might be, part of it, Sophia, I'm not sure, might also be, I think, yes, once you're on the program and you are as international, then you get a visa or you get the extended visa. So if that's kind of but yeah, I think working for 3 years without payment is quite a challenging situation. It's always a little bit tricky with non-citizens. Sorry, I think I'll try to figure out a little bit more about that and look that up. I think it's good to know. Okay, I think, is that Fiorella's? Okay, Lara, could you please give us an example of a psychology theory or any other thing that you learned during your undergrad that you applied for your job as a reading helper? Okay.
Okay, interesting question. But one of the things that I've noticed that I've been applying not as a reading helper, but just throughout my undergraduate and as an AP, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so I feel like any situation that you go into, you need to have your basic needs met in order for you to really thrive or be able to focus on your work. So a lot of the students that I was working with as a reading helper, they didn't feel safe. And that's mostly because they felt really uncomfortable with reading, and reading something that a lot of the times children have to do in lesson, and sometimes they get picked on to read out loud. And then that causes a lot of anxiety, and then that also causes negative stigmas towards reading, and they feel like, oh, I can't read, I'm not good at it. And then at that point, they also start to feel unsafe or start to feel anxious when they have to read. So the first thing that I did was that I had to make sure that they don't see this session as me testing their reading, or me seeing how good they are at reading. I had to really input the idea that this is a session that I'm going to show you that reading's a lot of fun. So we can read books that you like, or we can read books that you find fun, and you don't have to read them to me. So first we'll start off with me reading it to you, and then we can slowly build up from that. So then we can read together. I'll put my finger down, you read. So Maslow's hierarchy of need was a really big one. And I just had to make sure that they felt like they were safe with me in that session and they weren't being judged. But yeah.
Okay, very, very good. Okay, I was teaching about non-judgmental listening today, so that sounds great. Wonderful to hear that this proved successful for you too. I think I would just kind of stop it here and just really want to say thank you to Emilia, Laraib, Lucy, and Dahaba. Really, really grateful knowing that your time is super limited. And that was an amazing, I mean, I learned a lot. I always feel like, okay, it's another session where I learn a lot, which is not the main objective of these. But thank you so much. And I hope to see you in the beginning of February for our alumni event. And yes, Emilia, somewhere down the road, maybe. Yes, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And till then, bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.